الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان.
Assalamu alaikum, my friends. Welcome to another episode of Revelation, the audio experience. I'm Miraj Mohideen. Today we are still in Qur'an year 5, and we're going to be talking about the incident surrounding Surah Najm and what is later referred to as the Satanic verses. So many of you might be familiar with that statement or that phrase, the Satanic verses. There was a book that was very popular, I think in the 80s or so, that came out talking about the Satanic verses and so forth. What does this mean? When people say the Satanic verses, what are we talking about? Well, let's go to Mecca. And we are now in Qur'an year 5. We believe that shortly before or perhaps after the Abyssinian emigration, the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, was entering the area of the Kaaba, right? This sanctuary, the holy sanctuary. And there are many of his enemies who are there too. People would hang out there around the Kaaba, hanging out, talking, doing whatever they were doing. And as he approaches the crowd, he begins to recite one of the latest surahs, a Meccan surah that had come down to him, that is now known as Surah Najm. And Najm means star. The surah begins, "By the star, when it declines, your companion is not mistaken, nor is he being misled." Right? Your companion. You'll hear the word sahib, right? Your companion. This is where the word sahaba comes from the companions. He is not mistaken, nor is he being misled, and he says nothing on his own. It is no less than revelation revealed.
والنجم إذا هوى ما ضل صاحبكم وما غوى وما ينطق عن الهوى إن هو إلا وحي يوحى.
Now, as expected, the typical reaction from the Meccans is to mock the Prophet for these ridiculous verses, these magical verses, because they were saying that he's a magician, he's a soothsayer, this person is trying to trick people, entrap them, and so forth. So they start this That's what they used to say to each other. Remember, in Noah's time, they would stick their fingers in their ears and, they would not want to hear the message. It's like, imagine if you're talking and someone covers their ears and starts going, la, 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 la. Like, how arrogant is that? And how rude is that? How discourteous? And this is what we were talking about before when we were talking about these Arabic words of istighna and kufr, haughty, arrogant, discourteous behavior to the person who is coming to you with generosity. And so Surah Fussilat describes the color commentary of what's going on in this scene. And I'm telling you all this so you can really get into the scene as if you were there, an onlooker, seeing what's happening as the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, maybe on this dusty day in Mecca, is now close to the Kaaba and people are being so nasty to him. So despite their mockery, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, does what he always does. He pushes through, he perseveres like Noah, like Moses, like all these prophets who came before, these coaches who are showing him how to do it. And so what does he do? He continues to recite the entire surah until he comes to the last few lines where he says, "This man," speaking about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, this is a warner, just like the warners of old. The day of judgment is getting closer and closer, and no one can move it forward save God. So are you amazed at this narrative? Will you laugh and not cry, wasting all your time in useless distractions? Then know that you should bow down and prostrate before God and serve Him.
هذا نذير من النذر الأولى أزفت الآزفة ليس لها من دون الله كاشفة أفمن هذا الحديث تعجبون وتضحكون ولا تبكون وأنتم سامدون فاسجدوا لله واعبدوا.
So the surah ends with this command, fasjudu lillahi. Fasjudu is the word, the kind of the command form of sujud, right? So bow down, prostrate to Allah and worship Him. This is a command. And we know in the Qur'an, this command of bowing down comes, like I mentioned previously, I think roughly 14 times in the Qur'an, if I remember correctly. And the vast majority, about 12 of those 14 times, happens in the Meccan period because we're establishing relationship. We're defining the relationship between the creator and the created. And if we truly understood how thankful we should be to Allah, we would constantly bow down. If you think about it, it's a very natural tendency. Imagine for a second, you're in a bind. Let's create a scenario here. You have a flat tire in the middle of an interstate highway. There's no one to help you. You're trying to find help. You don't have cell phone service. You are just lost, right? And remember, I said human beings, we don't want to be lost. We don't want to be alone. These are just very uncomfortable emotions for us. So we are lost and alone. We don't have water. We don't know what we're going to do. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, imagine a tow truck comes, happens to see you on the side of the road. It's not a tow truck that you called or alerted. It just happens to be kind of coming back on a different trip, and it sees you there, and it comes over, and the guy comes out and says, "Oh, hey, buddy, do you need help? Let me just tow you back to town because I'm headed in that direction anyway." Just imagine this scenario. What would your reaction be? Would you stand up with pride and be like, "Okay, thanks. It's about time someone came in this town to help me out"? Or would your body actually hunch over and you would extend your arms wanting to shake this person or maybe even hug this person, and you would say, "Oh my God, thank you so much. I can't tell you how appreciative I am of you," right? Just think of your body language. You would be hunched over, you'd be made smaller, and you would be kind of giving respect and love to this person because of how much you appreciate them. That's what I envision as sujood, is this hunching over to its best degree where you're actually putting your head on the ground and saying, "Oh Allah, thank you so much for saving me. I was lost and alone on this journey, and you sent this prophet and all these prophets before to help give me a ride so I can hitch onto the back of them to take me to my destination. Thank you. You came out of nowhere and just saved me." To me, that is the feeling of sujood. And so what we see here is that these verses are so powerful. They're so eloquent and so moving. You can hear it in Hassan's voice and his presentation. It's so powerful that when the Meccans hear this command, fasjudu lillahi, what do? They too bow down with the Muslims who are around the Prophet Muhammad. They too bow down towards the Kaaba. Now, what happens when the pagans, who are the critics of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, have bowed down with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when he mentioned these verses? Well, some of the onlookers can't believe this. Wait, what? This guy bowed down and you bowed down and you, what were you guys doing? You were bowing down with the Prophet Muhammad? Have you joined these crazy Muslims and their cult? And so what do these people say, the people who bowed down with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him? They spread this story. They fabricate a story saying that they thought they had heard that the Prophet was calling upon the sister idols of Allat, Al-Uzza, and Al-Manat as divine intercessors for God. They are saying, "Oh, no. He actually mentioned Lat, Uzza, and Manat, and so we were bowing down because he was mentioning our idols too, and so we were bowing down to our idols too." And they're giving this ridiculous story of why they bowed down. They're trying to save face in this situation. So now there is buzz around Mecca. People are saying, "Hey, we heard, that they said that Muhammad is at the Kaaba and he is actually telling people to bow down to Allat, Al-Uzza, and Al-Manat. He's compromising now." And in fact, so much we have proof because there were our fellow people, pagans, who are bowing down with the Prophet Muhammad because the Prophet is saying, "Bow down to Allat, Al-Uzza, and Al-Manat." So now you have all this gossip and stuff going throughout the city, and people are wondering, is this the case? Oh, wow, well, maybe we can end this fighting because he has finally agreed to compromise on this issue. This is the story that is going around in Mecca. But what does Surah Najm have to say about this incident in its own verses? The surah calls out these liars and it says, have you seen the idols named Allat, Al-Uzza, and the third one named Manat? What? For you prefer sons, males, but then you assign females, daughters, as children to God? That's hardly a fair deal. In fact, they're nothing more than names that you've made up, you and your ancestors. God sent down no permission for you to do that. They're only following their own opinions and what they themselves foolishly desire. And so it is that guidance has now come down to them from their Lord. So see if they will obey God now, as they have always claimed they would.
أفرأيتم اللات والعزى ومناة الثالثة الأخرى ألكم الذكر وله الأنثى تلك إذا قسمة ضيزى إن هي إلا أسماء سميتموها أنتم وآباؤكم ما أنزل الله بها من سلطان إن يتبعون إلا الظن وما تهوى الأنفس ولقد جاءهم من ربهم الهدى.
So Allah in the surah itself is already preemptively responding, right, to this critique that would come against it, saying, you think that Allah would tell you to bow down to Allah, Al-Uzza, Al-Manat? How preposterous is that? Every single thing in the Qur'an that has been revealed up to this point, the Prophet, peace be upon him, entire stance, the fact that he has turned down every possible offer of compromise. He has turned down wealth. He has turned down power. He has turned down, they offered him women. I mean, he's turned down everything that most men would compromise for, right? The way, like nowadays, right? You turn down stock options, you turn down, extra profit, insider trading. That's what most people get stuck in now, right? The Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, is not like that. He turns everything down because he is committed to this cause. He is Abrahamic in his mission. And now the Meccans are saying, oh, he actually said Allat, Al-Uzza, and Al-Manat. How is that even possible? And that is kind of the traditional understanding of this situation here, the story of Surah Al-Najm. And the surah itself condemns the Meccans by saying, what? You kill your own daughters, but now you're giving God daughters? Like, it doesn't even make sense. Your logic is so backwards. Now, just to be clear, before I end this section on Surah Al-Najm, I just want to say that this idea of the satanic verses, where does that phrase come in, satanic verses? Well, there are actually narrations within the Islamic tradition which do suggest that Satan had actually inspired the Prophet to say that there were 3 sister idols, and these 3 sister idols were intercessors to God. And that this verse was later abrogated or changed with the verses that I just read to you, saying where God says, have you seen that they're saying Allat, Al-Uzza, and Al-Manat? These are daughters of God. And so within the Islamic tradition, there are some historians who suggest that the Prophet Muhammad was actually inspired by Satan, and then Allah later corrected that revelation. Now, this alternate account, it doesn't appear in any of the earliest biographies by Ibn Hisham, but it does appear in other respected texts that were written by later scholars like Al-Waqidi and Al-Tabari. But the account that I just explained to you is the account as we understand it from Imam al-Bukhari, who is considered the highest level of narration when it comes to what we believe in after the level of Quranic authenticity, right? And when it comes to sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him. So in looking at this situation and looking at what the commentary and the scholars have said about this, in my very humble opinion, it just doesn't make any sense that the Prophet, peace upon him, would be inspired by shaitan in any way, because then it would call into account every possible other revelation in the Qur'an and everything that has come into the Qur'an up to this point, including the opening lines of the surah, would be called into question and wouldn't make sense. And the Qur'an, we know, is completely coherent. The very opening lines, remember, say that your companion is not mistaken, nor is he being misled. If that's how the surah is starting, why in the surah would he be misled? So the whole idea of the satanic verses, really, when you look at it, just doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense whatsoever to have this one anomaly in 23 years of perfect teaching and perfect narration, to have this one mistake. It makes no sense. And the surah itself calls this out. And so that, in a general nutshell, is this idea of the satanic verses. And of course, as you can imagine, it's a very popular thing for people who are trying to attack Islam or trying to attack the tradition, as they like to hold on to this and say, oh, this man, Muhammad, he was just inspired by Satan the entire time. And look, you have narrations in your own tradition which say that. And you have to acknowledge that there are those narrations within our own tradition, but there are also some of the most powerful, strongest strength narrations suggest alternately. And when you look at the Qur'an and you have a bigger understanding of the entire Qur'an, it's pretty much impossible, again, in my opinion. So that wraps up this kind of overarching view of Surah Najm and the story of what has later been called the satanic verses. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Let me know in your feedback how things are working out for you. And God willing, I can't wait to see you guys soon. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.
إن الذين قالوا ربنا الله ثم استقاموا فلا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون أولئك أصحاب الجنة خالدين فيها جزاء بما كانوا يعملون.